I tend to hold on to small pieces like this, thinking they'll be useful for something later. Not enough of any one thing to commit to a project, just enough to feel bad about throwing it away. That's usually where they stay. This is just a small selection. Unfortunately, the alternative is realizing you want to build something and discovering you don't actually have the material to do it, which is a very effective way to not build anything. So instead, I keep material on hand. More than I need. I was hoping this project would fix some of that. It didn't. Instead, I went and ordered more. I've got a couple humidors to make, so welcome back to Shock and All. So some might consider me a bit of an oddball. Most find their technique and kind of stick with it, whether they're going to be, let's say, all digital, all analog. Me, I'm all over the place. You know, a little bit of CAD here, hand drafting there. As far as I'm concerned, each brings something different to the table. So I'm going to draft this out in a 1:1 perspective scale here. Now, I've broke out the calculator because I need to know the diameter on these cigars in a dimension that actually makes sense, as opposed to the ring size they use, which is, let's say it's a 50 ring size. That means it's actually 50/64ths of an inch. Yeah, I know. It's typical American stuff, I guess. We're always using something like, well, 3 lengths of a banana or something. Now look, what I actually know about cigars can fit on a Post-it with a fat crayon and still have some room left over. See what I mean? But I do know how to make pieces fit in a box. So what I'm adding now is the side profile views so I can do the details, because this box needs to have a liner. Most specifically, you either use Spanish cedar or mahogany, or so I'm told. Although I see a mistake here already. Thankfully, I corrected it in the actual design. The floor is supposed to go all the way out to the outer edge, and then the sides of the liner are supposed to sit on top of it, not the way I have it drawn there. Oops. Anyways, let's draw out a basic cut list so I know what kind of parts I need to get. And with that list all set, it's time to address the materials. One of these is going to get a very nice walnut lid that I purposely bought for this. Unfortunately, it's got some cracks. So I need to apply some packing tape to the back side of the piece, because I obviously need to fill these cracks. I mean, look, I could leave it all natural, but that's a maker's choice, and to be totally honest, I don't think most people appreciate that look. It's so hard to know. So what am I going to fill those cracks with? Yeah, you guessed it. It's going to be black epoxy. But hey, these are small cracks I'm filling. I'm not turning this into a resin river table or anything. And honestly, I think some of those can be really pretty. But it is an overdone thing, if I'm honest. So I'm going to use this small brush here. I really do recommend getting a bunch of these throwaway brushes. You find tons of uses for them. Anyways, I'm trying to pack it down in the hole to make sure that there's no air pockets. And I learned a little lesson from somebody else's epoxy failures. Don't try and heat the whole cup to make it flow in nicely to a hole. So instead, I am putting a daub on the stick here, and I'm using my torch to warm it up just enough to flow into the hole. I think it worked pretty well. So you'll notice I have a few different pieces of walnut, and they all have some different color variations. The key is one of them is an offcut of live edge and hasn't been steamed, so you get a lot more color variation. Always be on the lookout for that. It's really pretty stuff. Unfortunately, we're also dealing with natural materials here. And that piece of walnut I just cut has a pretty significant twist in it. We're going to have to take care of that. And now to bring in OSHA's favorite tool. It rolls, it has no safety switch, and it will eat you. I'm only using it for some really feather-light passes here to square it away. Once that's done, I am leaving this tool behind. Trust me, it scares me. We've gone from rocky road to full-on vanilla. Well, that ain't going anywhere. Post resawing and save on materials, you know. And the end result says we got a flat one, pretty flat. Oh, yikes. So I had to wait a week for the wood to acclimate. You only have to wait about 5 seconds. In fact, here we go. Yep, back to the joiner. Yeah, no. New trick. We're going to use this hot glue as a sort of liquid shim. That way I can attach it to a solid plate and it won't twist on me. And then pass it through my drum sander. The planer is also an option if you like clenching. Fastest way to gum up sandpaper? Attempt to sand hot glue. Really, try it sometime. Now we just gotta do a quick rip on these boards to get them to a rough width. And then we start mitered corners. Yes, I said mitered corners. Dialing in the saw is probably the hardest part for this. In fact, I got so sick and tired of it, I actually made a little 3D printed wedge for the job. The best suggestion I can offer for doing mitered corners is to cut your parts a little extra long and then test fit them. Odds are you'll probably need to tweak the angle slightly or something will be a little bit out of square, and you can catch it and modify it. It is really hard to glue it back on, though. Thankfully, this was an alignment issue, not a skill issue. Looks like we got this one right out of the gate. I don't have to recut these. Except they're too long, so I have to recut them anyways. I'd originally planned on just gluing the bottoms in, but I'm going to put them in a rabbet instead. But to keep the bottom flush, I need to also rabbet, well, the bottoms. So could I have completed these on the table saw? Yes, most definitely. However, the table saw's height adjustment is coarse? Is that a polite way of putting it? Anyways, I can dial in the router really nice and exactly where I want it, whereas the table saw is more of a suggestion. The other advantage to using the router is if I have to adjust the width of the base just a little bit, I can go cut it on the table saw, bring it back over to the router and readjust the rabbet. It basically allows for rapid readjustment. But in this case, it looks like I nailed it. Awesome. But how did that scratch get there? Also, I need to do little detail work. I'm going to put chamfers around the bottom of the bottom so that when you look from the underside, it looks like a detail, not just a gap. And you'll probably hear some significant background noise at times, provided my filter can't handle it. I am locked in Mortal Kombat with a heater that, well, it likes to pop up at the most inopportune time. It's the middle of winter, and I'm working in a basement. I rate my camera positioning 3 out of 10. In hindsight, it would have been much wiser to do two things. 1. Cut down your lid. 2. Wait till the sides were completely dried, then trim them to fit before attempting to glue the lid on. But no, of course I didn't do that. Instead, I had to fight with multiple clamps, including this one. Those who fail to learn from their mistakes are destined to repeat them. I should have cut this off beforehand, because now I got junk in the glue. Brilliant. So instead, I'm going to try a vacuum bag, which is probably the smart way to do things. Except I still pulled a dodo move. I should have put a larger plate on top as opposed to just squeezing it in the bag. I'll explain that later. Yes, we know there's excess. Thank you. So this is the poor man's version of a bandsaw template cutting setup. Basically all it does is keep the blade from touching your work, so it leaves a small edge you'll have to trim off with a flush trim router later on. See? It's just inside the edge there. So what happened is the vacuum bag pulled the sides into a very slight curve. The perfectionist in me hates it. The pragmatist in me says, it's fine, it's not a problem. The pragmatist has won today. So, same method, different part. I'm just cutting in some rabbets because we're going to put in some nice ebony trims on this. A, to cover up a few dings and whatnot, and B, because it's originally what I planned. Okay, show and tell time is over. Get back to work. No. Stop playing with the wood and get back to work. I had to recut these just a little bit. And that's because I found some tear out on it. Thankfully, really wasn't that difficult to deal with. I just needed to remember to use a zero clearance setup on the router table to fix that problem, and a little push block to save the parts. Come now. Just ebony trims? That's too easy. Now we gotta add some maple purflings to this as well. And I'm using hide glue, because I have little experience with hide glue. So what better way to learn than on something that you're not going to keep for yourself? This is a great idea. It might even be an excellent idea. Well, that sets up. We can start on this one. And for this, we're not going to be using any clamps for this first step. Nope. Instead, what we're going to need is this little stick of wood. Why? Because we'll be using super glue. But first, I need to cover this in some packing tape, unless I want this to become part of the build. And the super glue is because it contains no moisture, so it won't cause the maple to warp and curl. Trust me, you don't want that. Look, we've all been there trying to cut something with a ruler and a scalpel blade. It's not easy and puts your fingertips at risk. I know because I've taken a couple of them. So I find it easier to set up a stop for the ruler so it can't go anywhere. And then I'm just using tape as a depth stop so I can repeatedly cut these trims. And now back to mocking myself. I thought the camera was recording when I put these first pieces in. Apparently it wasn't. But that's okay. And yes, I know someone's going to say, don't point the chisel towards yourself. I'm using a slicing motion here. I'm not actually pressing at all. And besides, I pretty much gave up on that and switched to the file anyways. Just make sure you push the file towards where there's support. If you push it the other way, you'll just rip the trim right off. And trust me, that's no fun. So now this should show that footage that I'm missing. So it's apply some super glue and then brush it out a little bit with one of those sacrificial brushes. There's no way you're getting that one clean. Put the piece of trim down and then press it in with that stick we prepared with packing tape. Super glue goes off fast enough when it's pressed out thin that you don't have to wait for very long. Then apply the other piece and we'll spray it down a little bit. You notice it does get stuck just a little bit. And you may be asking about these. These are flush trim diagonals, and they are most excellent for this job. But they don't get exactly into the corner. They just get really close. Well, it's the next day. As you might have already seen on camera, I went about and just cleaned off all of these edges, if you will. They stood up a little too high for the next thing we have to do. And to do that, I went around with a scalpel blade, lightly cleaned things up, and then used a file to finish them off. The reason behind that is this stuff is really fragile, and if you try and chisel it flat, it tends to tear up. I also filled in some gaps with some really super thin glue and made sure everything's all stuck down. So the next thing to do is to start actually adding the ebony bits. Look, if you want nice mitered corners, use a mitered shooting board. The thing is, you're going to have to precisely adjust the size of these pieces individually. And the best way to do that is a hand plane. See what I mean? So, what's with the scraper? Well, I'm beveling off the interior corner and the one exactly opposite it. Reason being is the interior corner sometimes gets stuff stuck in it, and beveling that off helps it fit better. And beveling off the exterior corner, well, that's where the masking tape wraps over. And if you bevel it off, you can apply a lot more pressure without your tape ripping. I do have to say that woodworking and 3D printing are a most excellent match. I 3D printed this little miter box so that I could have relatively good 45-degree cuts without a massive box for my pull saw. You know, it's the little things. Speaking of little things, an upgrade to the shooting board is, let's add some sandpaper to that mitered face. I'm telling you, this was a massive improvement. I can't believe I didn't try it sooner. Made it a lot easier to cut. So it's the next day. Glue's had plenty of time to set up, and now I need to scrape all these flush. If I had cut them a little more accurately, I could have saved myself some time, but the card scraper will save my bacon here. Plus it makes these lovely chocolate looking curls. I wonder what they taste like. I do have to say though, this ebony, well, it smells a bit like burnt rubber. I don't know why. It's terrible. I want my rosewood back. At least that has a nice spicy smell. So the one thing that makes me a little nervous with the scraper is because I have those mitered corners, as you cut into them just a little bit, you're actually exposing the end grain of the next piece. So I stayed away from the corners and instead chose to use some 120 grit sandpaper to level them out. The other thing is, and I promise this isn't a cover-up, the ebony trims are just a little bit lower than the top of the lid. So I'm going to pillow the lid just a little bit. I promise. I planned on this going in. Promise. And now the big scary moment. Splitting the boxes in half at the bandsaw. So the thing is, I still will have to level out this joint. And to do that, I'm going to use the drum sander. Unfortunately, my footage is terrible, but the point is I'm going to actually push in on the box to keep it on the deck. That way it doesn't pop up and create a terrible joint. And do light passes. So I ran these through the drum sander to try and level off these joints here. It's not perfect. They're just have just a little bit of a gap. I think you can sort of see it. Hopefully I can punch in on that. You can see that basically it didn't sand off quite as much as the edges as it did over the center. Not surprising, those drum sanders have a little bit of flex in the head, so whenever you push something through, it will pop up and then drop back down. But I was trying to mainly get most of the big saw marks off, because I'm not the most hand-plane efficient person. Hopefully this goes well. I can see this potentially backfiring big time. Tear out is always a possibility. Maybe I should glue some leather to some of these. So this is really just a temporary solution. In time, I will probably make myself some very nice, soft, work-holding bench dogs. You know, big faces, the whole thing. In any case, for the moment, I am going to stick a cork on it. Also, don't do what I did here. Back your blade off, and then adjust it down till it cuts. Don't assume it's cutting perfectly. I cut a little heavy on this first one. I'm also trying to wrap the corner and doing an abysmal job of it. Can you tell I'm not a huge hand plane user? That being said, it doesn't look like I need to wrap the corner. This thing is cutting so well I don't have much to worry about. So you'll notice I keep switching directions I'm cutting with the blade. There's a good and a bad way. See the grain direction on this piece of exaggerated walnut? No, don't cut that way. That will break out pieces. Yes, that's better. Cut that way. And another thing, with these corner posts, we have another thing to be careful about. Don't cut over the edge. You might just break it out. Yes, thank you for the helpful finger wag. Instead, you're going to want to cut most of the way in, stop short, and come back the other direction. Yes, thank you. Almost as if right on cue, I was trying to cut the perimeter on this one with the hand plane, and I ended up catching this piece and breaking it out off camera. Thankfully, I was able to catch it quickly and glue it back in, but just one more reason why you want to stop short and then turn around. And because they're end grain, I can also get away with trying to trim them by pushing and cutting inward towards the inside of the box, because there really is no grain direction to end grain. Anyways, a lot of little tiny fine tuning here. So these aren't perfect yet. And actually, I am not shooting for an absolute perfect fit around the edge, because I feel like the more I chase this, the more odds are that I'm going to screw something up. It's time to start drilling out for some of our hardware. I'm just going to use some pretty simple hinges on the back, these nice little filigree hinges. So these I don't have to worry too much about. The latch, however, these are button latches. I've used a few of these over the years, and I am here to tell you they're fiddly little. If you are not right on the money with these, particularly with alignment respect to the pin to the latch, both front to back and left to right, they won't work at all. I think tolerances is on the order of like a 0.5 millimeter or something. It's nuts. That being said, I have a modern solution to this problem. That is a drill guide. Remember how I said 3D printing and woodworking go hand in hand quite nicely? This is why. Now, there's some things I didn't mention about these button latches, besides how fiddly they can be. All the dimensions are in metric, but it gets worse than that. This front bore, it's supposed to be 10.5 millimeters. Not all bit companies even make one that size. I'm currently drilling it out with a 7/16, and then I'll come back later with another trick. And the top bore is a 5 millimeter pin. Easy enough to come by, but... So the other thing is I have gone and I found this other drill bit in my stash that's not metric. I'm back spinning it to just barely open the bore. It's a 13/32, which turns out to be about 10.3 millimeters. It's really close. It's as close as I can get. I like to countersink the hole a little bit too, but I actually use a step bit for it. They cut so clean. And now to delete the major scratches from the drum sander thicknessing. Now we come to the inevitable crossroads. What to use for a finish. This project is as much a sensory sort of thing as it is a visual. So things that stink are kind of out. I could use this. This would be pretty effective. But it smells terrible. So I think I've decided that what I want to do, I can either go with good old shellac, at least as a base coat. But I think what I really want to do is I have found that amongst the finishes that are the best at pulling out grain, chatoyance, the best ones are your oil finishes and your lacquers. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with some tung oil. And tung oil's a little thick, so I'm going to thin it back with just a little bit of orange solvent. Smells good and gets the job done. The precise recipe for this is, well, a bit of this and a bit of that. Oiling, oiling, oiling. Using a little brush to get it down in that little crack there. Ooh. And now the one you've all been waiting for, including me. think the goat approves too. Unfortunately, SG, you're in the way. I need that spot. I'll get you a treat later, I promise. You're worse than the dogs. And now for some more modern methods. Yes, I am using the CNC. It's just to cut out the floor of the box. I'm just setting it up so that it has a liner that I can put the humidor pack in and a little cover. And part of the reason for the CNC will become apparent in just a second. Come on. Can you imagine trying to make this by hand? Let's be totally honest. Your time has a value, and unfortunately, most people aren't ready to pay that kind of value, I don't think. So cutting and fitting the liners turned out to be an interesting thing. See, I decided that I was going to taper the joint between the top and the bottom as opposed to keeping it square. It's more elegant and should provide a better seal. It would have been better had I cut that taper after cutting the miters. So it's been about 24 hours again. I'm going to take a piece of 1000 grit sandpaper here, and I'm going to kind of grain fill the box by sanding with oil. It's an old school technique. Now, I'm not using wet dry sandpaper here because I find the stuff I have, the gray grit comes loose and embeds itself in places it shouldn't. Hindsight, I would have used a 600 grit, but that's what I thought I was using. Until I looked at the paper and realized I grabbed 1000 by accident. I'm really not sure how much that did, but yeah, well. Gotta do all the sides too. But the one thing we won't do is the top of the maple. Reason being is I don't want to sand ebony grit into the maple pores. So it's been another day. I'm applying the third and final coat of finish, which is orange oil, tung oil, and some beeswax mixed in. I know, it's another YouTuber darling, the hard wax oil finish. But I made this one myself. It smells good too. Notice how much of a shine it brings out. I mean, here, come on. Just wait. Let's see how good this looks before and after. Polishing, polishing, polishing. Polishing. What? Did you really think I was just gonna copy him? Okay, seriously, dude, that's enough polishing. Can't believe you lasted that long. Yes, I get it. It's pretty material. But are we seriously polishing wood again? Okay, fine. When it looks that good, you get a pass this time. So order of operations here. Finish first, then add liner, so you don't get finish on liner. Now I'm going to use the liner to align the top so I can drill out the pin for the latch. What I didn't tell you is that I did the first box off camera, put the liner in all the way, and then realized I can't get my pin jig to fit in that space, which is why I'm only putting in 3 sides of the box. Again, with the 5mm bit. Wouldn't be complete without chamfers. Oh, sorry, countersinks. And it's at this moment where not having a 10.5mm drill bit may come back to haunt me. See, I'm having to use a clamp and a backing block to squeeze that latch in. but the depth of the hole is just shy of the depth of the latch, and so I ended up, well, wrecking the latch, honestly. So now I gotta pop this one out. And yes, it's a little weird using the drill bit, but it's the smoothest thing I have in the right size. So I'm going to take the liner here and put a small recess in the back. And I'm just using the drill bit in hand because this material is so soft. If I put it in the drill, I would go through it in an instant. And on to drilling out for the hinges. This drill bit is so small, I had to put tape on it for the chuck to grab it. For reference, there's a 1/16th, a 1.5 millimeter, and a goat for scale. I have 2 words. Be gentle. Screws this small will snap if you so much as look at them the wrong way. And to those of you out there who are going to say something like, Phillips are superior or flatheads suck, keep that to yourself. I don't want to hear about how your screws are superior. Thank you. Now that is satisfying. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you on the next one. It may be another guitar, probably will be another guitar, might be some more boxes, who knows. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.